license and registration, now.
Officer, may I ask what violation I committed?
I said, give me your documents.
Here's my license and registration. I'm recording for my protection and do not consent to a vehicle search.
Turn that off. Step out of the vehicle.
I'm cooperating, but I assert my rights. Please note this is under duress.
The dashboard camera started recording automatically when Officer Marcus Williams activated his emergency lights that Tuesday evening at 7:23 p.m. What should have been a routine traffic stop on Highway 95 was about to become the most expensive mistake of his career. The black sedan had been traveling exactly 3 miles per hour over the speed limit when Williams decided to pull it over. Inside that car sat someone whose identity would turn this simple encounter into a federal case that would destroy lives, expose systemic corruption, and prove that even those sworn to uphold justice aren't immune to its consequences. The man behind the wheel was David Richardson, a 2-year-old assistant attorney general who had dedicated his entire adult life to prosecuting the kind of officers who abuse their power. He drove a modest Honda Accord, lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and had never received so much as a parking ticket in over 30 years of driving. That evening, he was heading home from his office after working late on a case involving police misconduct. The irony of what was about to unfold would not be lost on anyone who heard this story. Officer Williams had been with the state police for 12 years. His record showed a pattern that internal affairs had somehow overlooked for over a decade. In those 12 years, Williams had made 847 traffic stops. Of those stops, 623 involved minority drivers. The statistics were staggering, but they had never been compiled into a single report until this case forced a complete audit of his activities. Williams earned $68,000 per year as a state trooper, lived in a small apartment, and supplemented his income by working security at local events on weekends. He considered himself a good cop, a fair cop, someone who treated everyone equally under the law. As Richardson pulled his vehicle to the shoulder, he already knew something felt wrong about this stop. His speedometer had shown 58 inches, a 55 zone, hardly grounds for emergency intervention. He turned off his engine, placed his hands on the steering wheel, and waited. This was a man who understood police procedure better than most officers themselves. He had prosecuted hundreds of cases, trained countless attorneys, and written legal briefs that had changed how law enforcement operated across 3 states. He knew his rights, but more importantly, he knew how quickly situations like this could escalate. Williams approached the driver's side window with his hand resting on his service weapon. This detail would later become crucial evidence in the federal investigation. Standard protocol for minor traffic violations does not require weapon readiness, but Williams had already made assumptions about the driver before even seeing his face. When Richardson lowered his window, Williams immediately demanded his license and registration without the courtesy of explaining why he had been stopped. Richardson calmly asked what violation had occurred. This simple question seemed to irritate Williams, who repeated his demand more aggressively. Richardson reached slowly into his glove compartment to retrieve his registration, announcing each movement clearly. From his wallet, he produced his driver's license and handed both documents to the officer. Williams examined the license with unusual scrutiny, holding it up to his flashlight, turning it over multiple times, and comparing the photo to Richardson's face repeatedly. The license was perfectly valid, the registration current, and the vehicle properly insured. There was absolutely nothing suspicious about any of it, yet Williams continued his examination for nearly 4 minutes. During this time, Richardson sat patiently in his vehicle, but he was also making mental notes of everything he observed: the unnecessary weapon positioning, the excessive document examination, the lack of professional courtesy, and the officer's increasingly agitated demeanor. As someone who had spent years prosecuting civil rights violations, he recognized the warning signs of what was developing. Williams returned to his patrol car with the documents, but instead of running a routine check and issuing a warning, he spent 12 minutes on his radio. The dispatch recordings would later reveal that Williams was not conducting any official business during those 12 minutes. He was not running Richardson's license through any database, not calling for backup, and not reporting any suspicious activity. The tapes showed Williams engaged in casual conversation with dispatch about unrelated matters, apparently in no hurry to complete what should have been a 2-minute interaction. This delay tactic would become a key piece of evidence in proving that Williams was deliberately prolonging the stop without justification. When Williams finally returned to Richardson's window, his attitude had shifted noticeably. He asked Richardson to step out of the vehicle. Richardson politely asked why this was necessary for a minor speeding violation. Williams claimed he needed to conduct a safety inspection of the vehicle. This was a lie. State police protocols do not require vehicle inspections during routine traffic stops, and Williams had no authority to demand such an inspection without probable cause. Richardson knew this, but he also knew that challenging the officer could lead to dangerous escalation. Richardson stepped out of his car slowly, keeping his hands visible at all times. Williams immediately ordered him to place his hands on the hood of the vehicle and spread his legs. This was completely inappropriate for a traffic violation, but Richardson complied while verbally noting that he was cooperating under protest. Williams began a pat-down search that was far more invasive than necessary, running his hands along Richardson's entire body, checking his pockets, and even examining the inside of his shoes. Other motorists driving by could see this humiliating display, but none stopped to witness what was happening. The search yielded nothing, of course. Richardson carried only his wallet, keys, and cell phone. No weapons, no contraband, no evidence of any criminal activity whatsoever. A reasonable officer would have ended the encounter at this point, perhaps with a verbal warning about speeding. Instead, Williams demanded to search Richardson's vehicle. Richardson asked to see the search warrant. Williams claimed he didn't need one because he had probable cause. When Richardson asked him to specify what probable cause he believed he had, Williams became visibly angry. This is when Richardson made a decision that would prove to be brilliant. He activated the voice recorder on his phone, which was still in his hand. He announced clearly that he was recording the interaction for his own protection and that he did not consent to any search of his vehicle. Williams heard this and his demeanor changed completely. He grabbed Richardson's wrist and demanded he turn off the recording. Richardson refused, stating that he had every legal right to record a public official performing their duties in a public space. Williams called for backup. Within minutes, 2 additional patrol cars arrived on the scene. Officers Janet Torres and Robert Kim emerged from their vehicles and approached the situation. Williams briefed them quietly, out of Richardson's hearing, but the recording device was still capturing audio. Williams told his colleagues that the driver was being uncooperative and acting suspicious. He claimed Richardson had been nervous during the initial contact and was refusing to comply with lawful orders. Every single word was a fabrication, and every single word was being recorded. Officer Torres approached Richardson and asked him to explain his side of the situation. Richardson calmly stated that he had been stopped for allegedly driving 3 miles per hour over the speed limit, had provided all requested documentation, had submitted to an unnecessary and humiliating search of his person, and was now being asked to consent to a vehicle search without any probable cause. He explained that he was cooperating fully but exercising his constitutional rights by recording the encounter and refusing to consent to an unreasonable search. Torres looked uncomfortable. She had been trained to recognize when situations were escalating unnecessarily, and this clearly fit that pattern. She quietly suggested to Williams that maybe they should just issue a citation and let the man go. Williams refused. He was committed to his course of action now, perhaps feeling that backing down would make him look weak in front of his colleagues. He told Torres that Richardson was hiding something and they needed to search the vehicle thoroughly. Have you ever witnessed something like this happening to someone else? Type yes in the comments if you have. Richardson remained calm throughout this exchange, but internally, he was documenting every violation of his civil rights. As someone who had prosecuted these exact scenarios dozens of times, he knew that Williams was digging himself deeper with each passing minute. The officer had no legal justification for prolonging the stop, no probable cause for a search, and no authority to detain Richardson indefinitely. Officer Kim attempted to de-escalate by asking Richardson about his profession. Richardson simply stated that he worked in law enforcement. Kim asked for clarification, and Richardson said he was an attorney who worked with police departments. This should have been a red flag for all three officers, but Williams was too invested in his power play to recognize the warning signs. He ordered Richardson to empty his pockets completely and place all contents on the hood of the car. Richardson complied, laying out his wallet, keys, breath mints, and business cards. Williams picked up one of the business cards and read it aloud. The card identified Richardson as an Assistant Attorney General, Criminal Division, Civil Rights Unit. The three officers exchanged glances, but Williams was past the point of no return. Instead of immediately ending this disastrous encounter, he doubled down. He claimed the business card could be fake and demanded additional identification, proving Richardson's position. This was the moment when Williams sealed his fate. Richardson pulled out his official government identification, his Bar Association membership card, and his courthouse security badge. There was no longer any doubt about who he was or what he did for a living. Williams was conducting an illegal detention and search of one of the highest-ranking prosecutors in the state, someone who specialized in prosecuting officers for exactly this type of misconduct. The recording was still running, capturing every word, every illegal demand, and every constitutional violation. Richardson's calm professionalism throughout the encounter would later be contrasted with Williams' increasingly erratic behavior. What started as a minor traffic stop was about to become a federal case that would expose corruption, end careers, and send multiple people to prison for decades. Officer Kim stepped back from the vehicle, clearly recognizing the magnitude of what was unfolding. He had never seen Williams behave this aggressively during a routine stop, and the presence of the Assistant Attorney General's credentials should have ended everything immediately. Instead, Williams seemed to interpret Richardson's official position as a personal challenge to his authority. He announced that he didn't care who Richardson claimed to be, that everyone was equal under his jurisdiction, and that the search would continue whether Richardson consented or not. Richardson's phone continued recording as Williams opened the driver's side door and began rifling through the interior. He pulled out floor mats, opened the glove compartment again, and searched under the seats. His movements were frantic now, as if he believed finding something, anything, would justify his actions. Officer Torres positioned herself between Richardson and Williams, perhaps sensing that the situation was spiraling completely out of control. She quietly asked Richardson if he wanted to call anyone, but Richardson declined. He knew that every additional minute of this encounter was building his case stronger. Williams moved to the trunk of the Honda, demanding that Richardson open it. Richardson stated clearly for the recording that he was opening the trunk under duress and without consent, that he was being illegally detained, and that this search violated his Fourth Amendment rights. Williams ignored these statements and began pulling items from the trunk. Richardson's gym bag, emergency kit, jumper cables, and spare tire were all examined meticulously. Williams even unzipped the gym bag and went through Richardson's workout clothes, checking the pockets of shorts and t-shirts as if they might contain evidence of criminal activity. The entire search lasted 47 minutes. 47 minutes of constitutional violations, illegal detention, and harassment, all captured on audio recording. Williams found absolutely nothing suspicious, illegal, or even remotely interesting. Richardson's vehicle was exactly what it appeared to be, the car of a law-abiding professional heading home from work. When Williams finally ran out of places to search, he stood by the open trunk, clearly frustrated and uncertain how to proceed. Officer Torres approached Williams and suggested they wrap up the stop. She had been increasingly uncomfortable throughout the encounter and wanted to minimize any additional damage. Williams reluctantly agreed, but his ego demanded one final power play. He wrote Richardson a citation for excessive speed, claiming he had been traveling 8 miles per hour over the limit rather than the 3 he had originally observed. This discrepancy would later become another piece of evidence demonstrating Williams's willingness to falsify official documents. As Richardson signed the citation, he asked Williams for his badge number and full name. Williams initially refused, claiming Richardson already had that information from the citation. Richardson pointed out that the citation only showed a badge number, not a full name, and that he had a right to know the complete identity of any officer who detained him. Williams grudgingly provided his full name, Marcus James Williams, badge number 4487. Richardson repeated this information clearly for his recording, along with the date, time, and location of the stop. Before leaving the scene, Richardson approached Officer Torres and asked for her name and badge number as well. Torres provided the information willingly and actually apologized for how the encounter had unfolded. She said it wasn't typical of how their department handled routine traffic stops, though her words suggested she knew exactly how atypical Williams' behavior had been. Officer Kim also provided his information when asked, though he seemed eager to leave the scene as quickly as possible. Richardson drove home that evening with his recording safely stored in multiple cloud locations. He didn't immediately call his supervisor or file any complaints. Instead, he spent several hours that night carefully transcribing the entire encounter, noting specific times, exact quotes, and legal violations. As a prosecutor, he understood the importance of building an airtight case with overwhelming evidence. He also knew that rushing into accusations without proper documentation could backfire. The next morning, Richardson met with his supervisor, Chief Deputy Attorney General Sandra Martinez. Martinez had worked with Richardson for 8 years and knew him to be methodical, professional, and completely trustworthy. When he played the recording of the previous evening's encounter, Martinez listened in stunned silence. She had prosecuted police misconduct cases herself and immediately recognized the severity of what had occurred. This wasn't just a bad traffic stop. It was a textbook example of racial profiling, illegal detention, and abuse of power. Martinez contacted the Internal Affairs Division of the State Police that same afternoon. She provided them with copies of the recording, Richardson's written statement, and a formal complaint outlining multiple violations of department policy and federal civil rights law. She also sent copies to the FBI's Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Martinez knew that cases like this required federal oversight to ensure proper investigation and prosecution. The State Police Internal Affairs investigation began within 72 hours. Detective Lisa Chen was assigned as the lead investigator, and she immediately requested all documentation related to the traffic stop. The dashboard camera footage from Williams' patrol car told a devastating story. It showed Richardson complying with every request, remaining calm and professional throughout the encounter, and clearly being subjected to treatment that no reasonable officer would consider appropriate for a minor speeding violation. Detective Chen also requested Williams' complete service record and discovered the disturbing pattern of traffic stops targeting minority drivers. The numbers were so skewed that they couldn't be explained by random chance or legitimate law enforcement activity. Chen's investigation revealed that Williams had been stopping Black and Hispanic drivers at a rate nearly 15 times higher than white drivers, despite patrolling areas with relatively balanced demographics. Even more damaging, his search rate for minority drivers was 43% compared to just 4% for white drivers. The investigation expanded to include officers Torres and Kim. Torres cooperated fully, providing detailed statements about the encounter and acknowledging that she had felt uncomfortable with Williams' conduct throughout the stop. She admitted that she should have intervened more forcefully, but had been uncertain about challenging a senior officer's decisions in the field. Her honesty probably saved her career, though she would still face disciplinary action for failing to prevent clear civil rights violations. Officer Kim was less forthcoming during his interviews. He claimed he couldn't recall specific details about the encounter and suggested that Richardson might have been more combative than the recording indicated. This attempt to minimize the severity of what had occurred would later backfire spectacularly when federal investigators took over the case. Kim's reluctance to cooperate and his apparent willingness to support Williams's version of events made him a co-conspirator in the cover-up rather than just a witness. Meanwhile, Richardson returned to his normal work routine, but word of the incident had spread quickly through the law enforcement community. Several attorneys who had worked with Richardson reached out to offer their support and share their own experiences with police misconduct. The story began attracting attention from civil rights organizations and legal advocacy groups who recognized the broader implications of what had happened. The FBI's involvement escalated the investigation to a federal level within 2 weeks. Special Agent Maria Rodriguez was assigned to lead the federal probe, and she brought resources and authority that the state investigation lacked. Rodriguez's team obtained search warrants for Williams' personal communications, financial records, and complete employment history. They also began interviewing every driver who had been stopped by Williams over the previous 5 years. What they discovered was a pattern of behavior far worse than anyone had initially suspected. Williams had been systematically targeting successful-looking minority drivers, particularly those driving newer or luxury vehicles. He seemed to take particular pleasure in humiliating professionals, business owners, and anyone who appeared to be doing well financially. The investigation revealed at least 37 instances of illegal searches, false citations, and racially motivated harassment over the previous 3 years alone. One case involved a black surgeon who had been stopped while driving to the hospital for an emergency procedure. Williams had detained him for over an hour, searching his vehicle and questioning his right to own an expensive car. The surgery had been delayed, and the patient's condition had worsened during that delay. Another case involved a Hispanic business owner who had been stopped 6 times in 8 months, always by Williams, always without legitimate cause, and always subjected to lengthy searches that yielded nothing. Agent Rodriguez also discovered that Williams had been sharing information about his stops with other officers, essentially bragging about putting uppity minorities in their place. Text messages and social media posts revealed a disturbing pattern of racist attitudes and a belief that certain people needed to be reminded of their proper place in society. These communications would become crucial evidence in proving that Williams' actions were motivated by racial animus rather than legitimate law enforcement concerns. The federal investigation also uncovered financial irregularities in Williams' background. Despite earning only $68,000 per year as a state trooper, he had been making large cash deposits into personal accounts and had recently purchased expensive items that seemed beyond his legitimate means. Investigators suspected he might have been accepting payments or bribes, though this aspect of the case remained under investigation. The federal investigation took a shocking turn when Agent Rodriguez discovered that Williams had been part of an informal network of officers who shared intelligence about minority drivers they considered problematic. This network, which investigators dubbed the Watch List, included 12 officers across 3 different departments. They had been coordinating their enforcement activities, sharing license plate numbers, and targeting specific individuals for repeated harassment. Richardson's case had inadvertently exposed a conspiracy that went far beyond one rogue officer. The FBI found encrypted messaging groups where these officers exchanged photos of expensive cars driven by minorities, discussed strategies for prolonging traffic stops, and celebrated successful takedowns of what they called attitude problems. The messages revealed a disturbing culture where constitutional violations were not just tolerated, but encouraged and celebrated. Special Agent Rodriguez expanded her investigation to examine every traffic stop conducted by these 12 officers over the previous 4 years. The pattern was undeniable and systematic. Black drivers were stopped at rates that defied statistical probability. Hispanic professionals were targeted with particular frequency. Asian business owners were subjected to vehicle searches at astronomical rates compared to white drivers in identical circumstances. The investigation also revealed that several supervisors had received complaints about these officers, but had consistently dismissed them or conducted superficial investigations that cleared the officers of wrongdoing. Internal affairs reports showed a pattern of protecting certain officers while ignoring obvious red flags. Some supervisors had even participated in the targeting by providing information about minority-owned businesses and professional offices in their patrol areas. Richardson continued his normal prosecutorial duties while the federal investigation unfolded, but he began receiving anonymous threats through various channels. Someone left a dead rat on his car windshield. His office received calls warning him to drop any involvement in police misconduct cases. His home address appeared on several online forums frequented by law enforcement officers, along with veiled suggestions about what might happen to prosecutors who betrayed police officers. These intimidation tactics backfired spectacularly. Each threat was documented and added to the federal case as evidence of obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. The FBI assigned protective surveillance to Richardson and his family, and every attempt to silence him became additional criminal charges against the conspirators. What had started as a simple civil rights violation was mushrooming into a massive federal racketeering case. The first arrest came 8 months after the initial traffic stop. Williams was taken into custody at his home on federal charges, including conspiracy to violate civil rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, obstruction of justice, and racketeering. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 25 years in federal prison. His house was searched, revealing thousands of dollars in cash, expensive electronics, and detailed records of his targeting activities. 6 other officers were arrested the same day in coordinated raids across 3 counties. Officer Kim, who had tried to minimize his involvement, was charged as a co-conspirator for his role in the Richardson stop and his participation in the broader conspiracy. His attempts to cover up the incident and provide false statements to investigators had elevated him from witness to defendant. The arrest sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across the region. Officers who had never been directly involved in the conspiracy began cooperating with federal investigators, providing information about the culture of racial bias they had witnessed but never reported. The blue wall of silence started cracking as officers realized they could face federal charges themselves if they continued protecting the conspirators. Officer Torres, who had cooperated fully from the beginning, was suspended for 6 months without pay but avoided criminal charges. Her testimony became crucial to the federal case, and she provided detailed accounts of how Williams and others had operated their targeting scheme. She described feeling pressured to participate but lacking the courage to report what she knew was wrong behavior. The federal grand jury that reviewed the evidence returned indictments against 14 defendants, including Williams, Kim, 3 supervisors, and 8 other officers. The charges ranged from civil rights violations to racketeering, conspiracy, tax evasion, and witness intimidation. The potential sentences totaled over 300 years if all defendants received maximum punishment. Richardson's life changed dramatically during this period. He became a nationally recognized figure in civil rights, law enforcement, receiving speaking invitations from legal organizations across the country. The recording of his traffic stop was used in police training programs as an example of how not to conduct law enforcement activities. Legal scholars wrote articles about his case, using it to illustrate the importance of citizens knowing their rights and documenting police encounters. The civil lawsuit Richardson filed against Williams, the department, and the supervising agencies sought damages for civil rights violations, emotional distress, and the broader conspiracy that had targeted him and countless others. His legal team, led by prominent civil rights attorney Michael Chen, presented evidence showing that Richardson had been specifically targeted because of his race, his success, and his position as a prosecutor of police misconduct cases. The discovery process in the civil lawsuit revealed even more damaging evidence. Internal emails showed that some supervisors had been aware of Williams' racial bias, but had actively protected him because they shared his views. Performance evaluations praised Williams for his proactive enforcement, without questioning why his stops were so racially skewed. Budget documents showed that the department had actually rewarded high-volume officers like Williams with overtime opportunities and commendations. The trial preparation revealed that Williams had cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in previous settlement payments for excessive force and false arrest claims. Despite this history, he had never faced serious disciplinary action and had actually been promoted twice during his career. The department's willingness to ignore obvious problems had enabled years of constitutional violations and civil rights abuses. As the federal criminal trial approached, several defendants began negotiating plea agreements. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including recorded conversations, documented patterns of racial targeting, financial records showing suspicious income sources, and testimony from dozens of victims. Even the most experienced criminal defense attorneys advised their clients that fighting these charges in court would likely result in much harsher sentences. Williams initially refused all plea offers, maintaining his innocence and claiming he had simply been doing his job as a law enforcement officer. His attorney argued that traffic enforcement naturally resulted in more stops of minority drivers because of demographic patterns in certain neighborhoods. This defense collapsed when statistical analysis showed that Williams had been traveling outside his assigned patrol areas specifically to target minority drivers in affluent communities. When the verdicts were finally read 18 months later, Williams received a sentence of 18 years in federal prison. His conspiracy convictions, combined with the racketeering charges and evidence of systematic civil rights violations, left the judge no choice but to impose the harsh sentence. The other officers received sentences ranging from 3 to 12 years, while the supervising officials faced up to 8 years each. Richardson's 47-minute traffic stop had cost these officers everything they had worked for and exposed a culture of corruption that reached the highest levels of their departments. Justice isn't always swift, but when brave people stand up and document the truth, it does come. And sometimes that justice changes everything. This case was intense, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.